Hi everyone. Sorry it's been so very incredibly long since I actually uploaded a video with content in it, and I just want to apologize if I seem a little out of it in this video. I have everybody in my house picked up some kind of weird virus that's attacking their tonsils, and of course I don't have any tonsils, so it seems to have been, let me see if I can get, it seems to have been attacking my lymph nodes, so I kind of look like I have the mumps right now, which is really attractive, I'm sure. So, but I am feeling a little bit under the weather. I figured as long as I was feeling too sick to work on my house, I had better make hay while the sun shines and get a video done. So that is what I am doing this afternoon. So, onward. Recently on the men's rights subforum on Reddit, a user asked why so many people, especially feminists, seem to be laboring under a misconception that men's rights activists believe men are oppressed by women, that women oppress men. And I've seen this straw man pop up quite a bit when I read feminist criticisms of the men's movement, and yeah, I have come across a few men's advocates, a few people in the manosphere who talk as if they actually do believe that women as a group oppress men as a group, and might be even a small handful who contend that the world has always operated in this way. But the vast majority of people who try to bring attention to the discrimination faced by men and boys, they just don't. Many, and certainly many of the most thoughtful of us, we try to avoid loaded words like oppression in regard to past and current gender roles and expectations. You know, while oppression can be the result of those social norms, especially in the legal sense, being expected to pay on a date isn't exactly what I would call oppression, and neither is feeling pressured by Western beauty standards to shave your legs, right? So the opponents that these feminists are beating up are at least partly stuffed with straw. And the conversation often goes something like this. You know, an MRA says, "I don't believe women were actually oppressed because of their sex, at least no more so than men were." And then the feminist replies something like this: "Oh, so what you're saying is that men are oppressed by women. Lol." And you can also find variations of these following lovely straw men. The MRA says it's unfair that nearly all funding and help for victims of partner violence goes to women victims. Feminist replies, "You just want to tear down battered women's shelters and make it legal for men to beat their wives." The MRA says men are about half the victims of partner violence and women about half the perpetrators. And the feminist says, "Oh, so what you're saying is that men are the real victims of domestic violence. Lol." The MRA says date rape situations are often really difficult to prove in court just because of the nature of them. This doesn't mean we should continue to erode due process protections for the accused. And the feminist will respond something along the lines of, "So what you're saying is you want rapists to get off scot-free, you rape apologist." And yes, I've condensed those conversations to the little nuggets of their essence. They usually, even if they don't come right out and say it, they will say that they will impute these intentions on us, and these motivations, and this set of beliefs. And this isn't a phenomenon confined to an internet populated by Twitterites who got their educations from Jezebel. This gem from Michael A. Messner, a feminist academic and expert in the area of men's studies, demonstrates that quite nicely. By the late 1970s and early 1980s, men's rights advocates were claiming that men are the true victims of prostitution, pornography, dating rituals, sexist media conventions, divorce settlements, false rape accusations, sexual harassment, and even domestic violence. That's from his book, Politics of Masculinities, Men in Movements. And oh, what a difference those two little words, the and true, make when placed side by side. Men are the true victims of X, Y, and Z implies that women are not also victims of X, Y, and Z. And this is simply not an accurate reflection of what 99% of MRAs think. The truth is, men can be and sometimes are victims of discrimination or exploitation in the realms of prostitution, pornography, dating rituals, sexist media conventions, divorce settlements, false rape accusations, sexual harassment, and domestic violence, though most often they are discriminated against or exploited in different ways than women are, and for different reasons. And oddly enough, women can also be victims of discrimination or exploitation in these very areas. Yet, how are statements such as "men are also victims" interpreted by feminists? Men are the only victims, or the real victims, or the true victims, to the exclusion of women, as if we actually really believe that. To assert that men face institutionalized discrimination, often in different spheres and based on different stereotypes than the discrimination women face, is translated into the feminist mind as a denial that women face discrimination of any kind. To advocate for greater awareness of and assistance for abused men is translated in the feminist mind into an agenda to dismantle existing protections for women. To assert that economic power includes the power to spend money or to have it spent on you by others, as well as the power to earn it, is translated in the feminist mind into some kind of blanket claim that women have all the economic power and men have none. And then they turn around and accuse us of being deficient in nuance or complexity, of framing gender issues as a zero-sum game. I doubt I've ever seen quite as much black and white thinking, not even when my kids were toddlers, as I have during my exchanges with feminists, or so much projection of any person's own bigoted attitudes and intellectual failings onto others. So I think we can all agree nuance is not a feminist strong suit. Remember, man bad, woman good, man bad, woman good, wash, rinse, repeat. Oh, if only things were that simple. Yet they treat them as if they are. They will cling in the face of overwhelming evidence to the long-debunked fact that the vast majority, almost always portrayed in terms of 95% or more, of partner violence, child abuse, and sexual misconduct is perpetrated by men, and anyone who points to contrary evidence will be condemned by gangs of internet feminists as hateful and sexist toward women, or whiner determined to make the conversation all about the men's. At the same time, they will consider it not even remotely hateful or sexist toward men to spread the belief, based on flawed, biased, or even no evidence, that men perpetrate virtually all interpersonal violence globally, and routinely hound male victims out of conversations about problems that actually affect men more than women. Problems like genital cutting, or street violence, or harassment online. Promote the misconception that men are uniquely capable of evil? That's just fighting the good fight for equality. Promote the empirically established fact that women are not always innocent and peaceful angels in certain contexts? You misogynist. Try to raise public awareness of problems that disproportionately affect men? Oh my God, check your privilege, shitlord. As a woman involved in advocacy for men and boys, I've been accused by feminists of a number of things. Being a battered woman, having Stockholm Syndrome, being an attention whore desperate for male approval, being a con artist looking to scam men into thinking that they have problems they really don't so I can cash in, abusing my kids and my boyfriend, being a man's sock puppet, wanting women back in the kitchen, being an actual whore, being a traitor to my gender, being mentally ill, and a whole host of other interesting speculations, none of which actually apply, but all of which give feminists some kind of moral permission to dismiss or completely disregard what I have to say. And you'd be stunned at how much of it is sexist. That they want to dismantle all of these stereotypes about women, and then they'll claim that I don't like what Christina Rad, Zomgets Chris, has to say because I think she's prettier than me, and I'm just jealous? Come on, ladies. You can come up with something a little less sexist than that, can't you? So I've been trying to figure out how and why feminists are able to think and behave in these ways. And believe me, it ain't no fun being inside a feminist's brain. But the mental gymnastics are pretty interesting to watch. For example, male privilege is pervasive and benefits all men. Female privilege doesn't exist. So, if a woman makes a false claim of abuse in order to secure custody of her children in a divorce and is not penalized in any way by the legal system that discovers she lied, when in fact she's permitted to profit from her abusive process, that's actually misogyny, don't you know? because it's based on harmful stereotypes of women as caregivers and as weak and fragile and not able to control their actions. And when her husband is thrown in jail without any due process and loses his children all based on the word of a woman who was given everything she wanted by the family court, well, that couldn't possibly have anything to do with harmful stereotypes about violent, rapey, child-abusing men that have led to cultural, institutionalized, and legalized misandry, all of which are perpetuated and reinforced by feminist theories of interpersonal violence. Nope, couldn't be that, because misandry don't real. Stop blaming women for all your problems. And the really hilarious thing is the mirror in attitudes. I find it just intensely interesting that so many feminists claim society is rife with misogyny, and they'll insist that this doesn't mean they blame all women's problems on men. But at the same time, in their minds, even considering misandry a thing is tantamount to blaming all men's problems on women. Feminist at its most consistent right there. Or maybe it's more projection. Some other lovely consistencies in feminist rhetoric. According to them, men suffer because of the cultural socialization of masculinity, which is what they would call patriarchy hurts men too, while at the same time suffer no discrimination or marginalization due to the fact that they're men, and can only experience discrimination due to some other aspect of their identity, such as race or sexual orientation. Yep. You heard it here first, folks. Men experience problems due to cultural expectations of masculinity, but none of men's problems are attributed to the fact that they're male. If nuance isn't exactly feminism's strong suit, and consistency is one of their weakest, it's apparent that coherence isn't even in their deck of cards. So, to solidify the feminist position, any disenfranchised man situation is part of patriarchy, and patriarchy is what feminists are fighting against, so men should support feminism because feminists fight the patriarchy. Well, except for when they're not doing anything, or worse, when they're fighting to reinforce and institutionalize harmful anti-male stereotypes through their research, writings, educational campaigns, and legislative lobby efforts. I suppose no one likes to be held accountable for the bad things they and their friends get up to, especially when their entire identity revolves around feeling morally superior to others. But the possibility that feminists appear to be only slightly less ignorant of what the sisterhood does in theory and practice than they are of the ideas and goals of the men's rights movement, well, that defies credulity. Is it willful ignorance or a form of mental illness? Stupidity? Blind faith? Who knows? Well, I'm starting to maybe figure it out. As most of you know, I recently attended a rally in Toronto for Men and Boys in Crisis, and I witnessed possibly the least subtle example of this phenomenon imaginable. A group of protesters carrying banners referencing a now defunct queer anarchist organization called Bash Back showed up to shout accusations at us through a pink bullhorn. Sexist, racist, anti-gay, MRA, go away! We're here, we're queer, we're feminists, don't fuck with us. And, this gem. Your daughters should be ashamed of you. One held a sign that admonished the reader to listen to women. The women and visible minorities in our crowd, the fact that probably the most well-known MRA present at the rally, myself, at least to look at, is a bisexual woman, the fact that one of our speakers was a social worker who specializes in securing food, shelter, and funding for marginalized and ill LGBT people, all of that was irrelevant. Even after we pointed out these oversights to the protesters, they continued with their accusations of racism, sexism, and homophobia, defiling a war memorial to do it, which was just wonderful. Heck, they even persisted after I shouted their own words back at them. I'm here, I'm queer, listen to women. After the rally, a documentarian who had filmed the event asked me why I thought the protesters had behaved as they did. Part of my conclusion originated in my own feelings of discomfort of a year or so ago when I realized I was going to have to put aside any convictions as to what I thought society ought to look like if I had any hope of staying objective. At that point, I was already discovering that if I believed I had found the solution, I would stop asking questions, or I would ask only those that would lead me to where I wanted to go. I had already caught myself wanting to disregard evidence that challenged my assumptions simply because it didn't facilitate the vision I had of what the world should look like. So I told the documentarian that I believed the protesters were behaving the way they were because they were locked within an ideological framework. That framework is essentially one of class conflict, Marxism repurposed to apply to gender, with men in the role of the bourgeoisie and women the proletariat. This is the model by which they view society, how it operates, and why it operates the way it does. Men are the oppressor class, women are the oppressed class. Kindergarten-level simplicity, easy answers, and no room for any real questions. They believe they've identified the problem. The problem is the patriarchy. Men as a class of privileged oppressors, and women, and more recently LGBT people, as the oppressed class. To them, the patriarchy is the causal agent behind pervasive harmful gender norms and expectations, and is even the ultimate source of all forms of discrimination, including racism. Their solution to the problem is to dismantle the patriarchy, which involves empowering women, LGBT people, and other groups who are not male, white, straight, cisgendered, able-bodied, physically attractive, or otherwise advantaged, and specifically eliminating male privilege and dominance. Any effort to empower a group or even an individual whom they believe already benefits from a system that unfairly advantages them is supporting the patriarchy. As such, that effort is by definition disempowering to women and even harmful to men who are marginalized in their minds by something other than maleness. More than that, they're wading so deep in the intellectual quagmire of the gender Marxist model. They can't conceive of framing gender issues or sexism within any other model, nor can they even tolerate anyone else doing so. And this is why you have so much resistance to any suggestion that there is institutional discrimination, actual sexism by their definition, discrimination with power behind it against men. Because as much as they say they don't believe in a exact, precise gender binary, they live within a binary where men can only be advantaged and women can only be disadvantaged. It's because of this model of oppressor sex and oppressed sex that any assertion that women are not oppressed by men is interpreted as an assertion that men are oppressed by women. In order to maintain the framework, somebody's got to be oppressing somebody. And it certainly couldn't ever be women doing the oppressing, because we already know man bad, women good, man bad, women good. Protecting this model in the face of our growing understanding of human nature and behavior, particularly surrounding problems such as family violence and sexual violence, requires the performance of stunning intellectual and rhetorical backflips to keep the narrative going. They will nearly always reframe harmful discrimination against males as a byproduct or adverse side effect of misogyny, sometimes calling it secondary misogyny. And this is the really dangerous thing, because if they can twist a situation where a man is actually being oppressed by the system, a man who's been jailed without due process on a woman's accusation, for instance, as misogyny, then there's no amount of proof that you will ever be able to give them that men are no longer, in their minds, an oppressor class, that men are no longer advantaged relative to women. I mean, this is what they will do, always, always, always flipping it and turning it into some form of misogyny, so they can always maintain the belief that women are on the bottom, no matter how low men end up in the hierarchy of humanity. I could even envision in that feminist utopia of only 10% of the population being male, because each of those men would have a certain amount of sexual power that would be amplified because there are so few men. They would translate that as, powerful men. The men would still be in power because of that, and women would be oppressed because they don't have immediate access to, a male when they want it. I mean, they could take something like a reverse of The Handmaid's Tale and still claim that men are in power. And that's the scariest thing ever, because it means that there's no end. There's no end in sight. Standpoint theory allows them to redefine perception as a form of reality, basically saying that all people's experiences and perceptions are equally valid and therefore equally real. And that was developed in order to eliminate the requirement for empirical proof, empirical evidence supporting people's feelings and their view of the world. And that necessitated the development of other philosophical tools like problematization and strong objectivity, which then gives them permission to disregard points of view that challenge their foundational paradigm if that point of view is presented by the wrong person. Problematization involves prioritizing the personal and political identity as well as the perceived motivation and inferred intentions of a person making a statement, as well as whom the statement will potentially benefit or harm over that statement's truth or veracity. It's essentially kind of like an ad hominem or even a straw man fallacy legitimized within academia. Newly discovered facts making you feel uncomfortable? Just shout, "You're only saying that because you hate women." This is actually a legitimate tool of discourse. And problem solved. Now anything a man says can be dismissed out of hand, no matter how objective or relevant or empirically sound, simply because he's a man and his intentions are open to interpretation. You see, we don't even have to consider his point of view as being valid because of who he is, because of his identity. Strong objectivity works along the same lines. It's the idea that the scientific method and most scientific research happened during a period of white, straight male dominance within that field, and it's therefore just inherently biased. It's inherently loaded down with cultural biases. And I would agree that research based, at least nominally, on the scientific method can be extremely biased. I mean, you see this in research on circumcision, and you see this in research on domestic violence, and all kinds of stuff like that. Really, based on the methodological tool used, even when they are using the scientific method to perform a piece of research. If they choose to control certain variables and not control others, they're nominally applying the scientific method, but they're doing it with biases, and that often skews the results way out of whack. However, strong objectivity says that research must be approached from the starting point of women's lives, which basically puts the cart before the horse as far as research goes. We don't find out about women's lives by doing the research. We decide what women's lives and what their experiences are, and then we start from that point and perform our research from that skewed perspective. And that's basically, that just describes so much feminist advocacy research that for decades has promulgated the lie that domestic violence is not only sexually directional, but that it is rooted in men's and women's relative political positions in society. This is really, it's an obscene thing to say that strong objectivity occurs when we are obviously being biased. It's retarded. But again, it's a valid tool of academia. It's a valid concept within feminist and postmodern philosophy. So, other postmodern and feminist intellectual tools have turned rational discourse right on its head, and it's essentially trained young students to believe, as a few feminists on University of Toronto's campus and on Vancouver's Commercial Drive, when confronting John the Other with his posters, how they can assert that silencing opposing opinions is a form of free speech. So we're really turning reality upside down here, and it's all legitimized by academia. And that's really the scariest thing, that this kind of flim-flammery has been validated by universities and is actually taught to thousands of impressionable young people as legitimate branches of research, philosophy, and discourse. Not just the gender Marxist model of the patriarchy, But all these nifty new tools that have been slapped onto it in order to allow feminists to continue disregarding contrary evidence by imputing ill intent on the person presenting it, or by claiming that gender-neutral research is somehow less objective than that which centers women's experiences. This is the branch of philosophy that condemned Newton's Principia Mathematica, a treatise on calculus, as a rape manual, and declared E equals mc squared was a sexed equation. And why do they have to do all of this? When challenged with contrary evidence or ideas, they're unwilling or unable to reevaluate their basic set of assumptions and the theoretical framework that they exist in. It's basically like saying to a devoutly religious person, yeah, God and the devil don't exist, so, they're just not going to accept that. They're not going to change their worldview, and it doesn't matter how much evidence you heap on them. They're not going to do it. They're not going to change their way of seeing the world. And this black-white binary, this male-female binary where, oppressor, oppressed, it's just not something that they're going to be willing to let go. And so they have created these and invented these official-sounding justifications for ignoring all that evidence so they can protect and perpetuate their worldview. They're intellectually chained to an ideology and to a framework, and they'll create layer upon layer of obfuscation, dishonesty, and hostile rhetoric to ward off any threat to it and silence any question. To paraphrase a quote from a recent commenter at A Voice for Men, ideological feminists seem to see Orwell's 1984 not as a warning, but as an instruction manual. And the most difficult thing about this, for those of us who sort of see what's going on, is that it's not the details that produce so much resistance to new ideas and evidence. You can watch feminists nitpick each other over details all the time and disagree and get into some resounding arguments over those petty little details. It's the original framework. It's not the curtains. It's the foundation of the house. It's the lens that they're looking through. And, it's really easy to slap some drywall compound over a crack in the wall or stick a sofa over the soft spot in the floor, which is what they're doing when they're nitpicking those details. It's a little more difficult for someone to convince them that they need to completely bulldoze the house and rebuild it from the ground up, because the engineering itself was faulty, the framing itself was faulty, the physics that they were using were faulty, and all they're going to have is more cracks developing and that they're going to have to slap plaster on, and more soft spots in the floor that they're going to have to push furniture over top of to hide. And this is what they would rather do. They would rather slap some problematization plaster on that crack in the wall, or hang some strong objectivity, artwork over top of the blemish. And when the floor sinks, they'll fill it with standpoint theory, rather than repouring the foundation and rebuilding everything from scratch. And all the while, they will insist that the house's bones are just fine, and it's oppression to claim otherwise. And honestly, this is why there is actually, in my mind, no point at all arguing one-on-one with feminists, because they will not. They are looking out of a different brain, and they are processing the world in a completely different way, and they have a completely different psychological schema when it comes to gender issues, and they cannot adapt their theories. And this is one of the reasons why I think feminism just cannot be reformed. It has to be completely thrown out. It's based on a faulty premise, and that faulty premise will taint every single aspect of it until the premise itself is tossed in the trash. However, it is a very good idea, always, 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 to debate with feminists in places where other people can see, and especially in places where, like on YouTube or in comments, where people can see over and over and over and over again, can watch more than once, and where more than the people who are there at the moment are going to be able to get to see it. Because the more we expose the absolute simplicity of this black and white thinking that they are performing, the more I think people are going to start to wake up and realize that gender issues are just way, way, way too complex to be defined as oppressed and oppressor, and that they really shouldn't be defined in terms of oppression at all. You know, I really, not in the West, not in the West, not unless somebody's going to jail without due process. There's no cause to be calling anything like that oppression. So, other than that, that's kind of it for me for now, and hopefully I will be back with another video sometime soon. I will be on the radio Thursday night, Honey Badger Radio, and I think we're going to be discussing a lot of these issues on the show, and expanding on them and all of that. And it's definitely something that I could talk about for hours, because so much of it is just, I don't understand how normal, logical people can let these things slide. In an article, it was even a fairly balanced article on the men's rights movement. You had one feminist saying, "Oh, of course men have problems due to the fact that, you know, society culturally socializes masculinity in certain ways," and then another feminist saying, "None of men's problems are because they're men." And you know, so it's, and the journalist just didn't even pick up on it. I mean, it just right over his head that this is like a serious inconsistency, and how can you hold those two beliefs in your head at the same time? So, I guess I will, hopefully, you will all be there while I'm on the radio, and hopefully I will have another video out to you fairly soon. And, oh, one more thing. Subscribe to Razorblade Candy's new channel. I will leave the link in the low bar. His account got terminated due to a third video being flagged and a third strike on his account. He is in the process, I think he may be finished at this point, of re-uploading every single video that he had on that channel and rebuilding his channel from scratch. And I know he has a new video up to inaugurate his new channel. So if you weren't subscribed to him before, go ahead and hit the button, and if you were subscribed to him before, go subscribe again. And I don't always agree with everything he says, but he always does make me think, and he can be fairly entertaining when he's doing those back and forth videos with feminists. So I guess I will see you all later. Bye.